교회 여러분 안녕하세요. 목요일 말씀 묵상 시간입니다. 이제 다음 주면 고난주일이 시작되는데 여러분 이제 그동안 사순절 동안 또 예수님, 또 우리를 위해 돌아가신 예수님 얼마나 많이 묵상하고 계신지요. 오늘 미연 전도사님이 예수님의 그 사랑, 우리를 위한 사랑을 가지고 말씀하시는데 또 오늘도 하루 많이 은혜 받으시는 하루 되기를 바랍니다.
나 주의 도움 받고자 주 예수님께 빕니다. 그 구원 허락하시사 날 받아주소서.
요한복음 13장 2절에서 4절 말씀입니다. 마귀가 벌써 시몬의 아들 가룟 유다의 마음에 예수를 팔려는 생각을 넣었더라. 저녁 먹는 중 예수는 아버지께서 모든 것을 자기 손에 맡기시는 것과 또 자기가 하나님께로부터 오셨다가 하나님께로 돌아가실 것을 아시고 저녁 잡수시는 자리에서 일어나 겉옷을 벗고 수건을 가져다가 허리에 두르시고 아멘.
Good morning, church family. I hope you are all having a wonderful week so far. Well, today we are looking at John chapter 13, verses 2 through 4. And in this passage, Jesus is having dinner with his disciples, and we learn that the devil has put into the heart of Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus. You know, betrayal means to give someone over to an enemy or to be unfaithful to a friend. It is to violate the trust of someone you love. So you may have experienced a type of betrayal in your life before. And the effects of betrayal on a person can be absolutely devastating. It can be shock, grief, damaged self-esteem, self-doubting, anger, and many more things that can destroy a person's mental, emotional, and even physical or spiritual health. What I want to focus your attention on today is Jesus' response and actions as he faces deep betrayal and even death. We know that Jesus' death on the cross draws nearer and nearer, but we also know that Jesus knows all things already. And John makes this very clear in verse 3. Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, and that he would be returning to the Father soon. He knew the Father's plan for salvation and that it would not fail. Jesus was not going to betray the Father by running away or quitting. Jesus had no intention of betraying his disciples or you and me, the ones he has been called to love by the Father. As we saw last week, Jesus was going to love to the very end. So he knew the kind of death that was awaiting him on the cross. He knew the suffering and excruciating pain that he would go through. He knew the betrayal he would experience from Judas, the denial from Peter, and how all the disciples would run away in fear when the soldiers came to arrest Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew that he would be separated from the Father in order to pay the price for our sins. Jesus knew, yet he continued to love. In Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, it says that Jesus, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. There was a joy that was waiting for Jesus that made all the suffering and pain worth it. It was a joy of obeying and accomplishing the Father's plan to rescue sinners. It was the joy of redeeming the people that he loved. And it was the joy of being seated at the right hand of the Father in glory. It was all of these things, this joy that Jesus held on to, that allowed him to do what he does in verse 4. Jesus gets up from supper, and laying aside his garments, he takes a towel and he gets ready to wash the disciples' feet. And this is an extreme and dramatic act of servanthood. Only the lowest servant in the household would wash the feet of everyone in the room. The strange thing about the timing of this is that it happens after the meal and not before. No one's feet had been washed before they sat down on the floor. So you can imagine their feet probably smelled, especially at the kind of low table that they were eating on. If you had asked any of the disciples to wash Jesus' feet, everyone would have jumped at the chance. But in doing so, it would have meant that they would also be asked, or at least expected, to wash the other disciples' feet. But none of them were interested in washing each other's feet. So Jesus, as the true master and a perfect and humble servant, he does it himself. And what Jesus does, in light of all the betrayal and suffering he will soon face, is no different from what he has been doing all along. It was to love and serve with humility and sacrifice. When I imagine all the things that Jesus endured even before he was nailed to the cross, I know it would have been impossible for me to do. I would have run away or escaped. I would not have been able to sit down and have a meal with people that I knew would betray me in only a few hours. I would be hurt, offended, scared, and angry. The last thing I would think of doing would be to serve them. And even more, I would never think of washing the feet of those who would betray me. And you may be like me, or you may be different. But the fact is, the reason why Jesus had to do and accomplish these things was because he was the only one who could. Jesus is the only perfect and holy one. Only Jesus could endure such agony and torture and yet still obey the Father perfectly while loving and serving his enemies. And this is why Jesus, and only Jesus, is so worthy of our lives and worship. I encourage you to read the rest of this chapter to see how Jesus models and teaches the new commandment, which is to love one another as Jesus loved them. The application from this chapter is not hard to figure out. But in order to actually love others like Jesus did, we have to let Jesus' example of love and servanthood truly set into our hearts. We need to meditate deeply on not only how Jesus loved us, but the fact that he loved us despite all that was happening around him. He was being betrayed and denied and abandoned by those he was closest to. Yet he refused to betray, deny, or abandon his disciples. He was hated by so many and given over to be hanged on the cross, yet he chose to love his enemies. No one can endure all these things perfectly except for Jesus. And that is why we worship him today and forever. I ask the Lord to help you and I to understand the humble and sacrificial love of Jesus. And as we do, that we would also begin to love and serve as Jesus did. The Lord bless you today.
전도사님 말씀 감사합니다. 오늘 말씀 중에 예수님께서 식사를 하신 후에 다리를 길게 뻗고 누우셔서 제자들에게 오늘 너희들이 내 발 좀 닦아라. 베드로 수제자가 너니까 너부터 닦아라 했으면 참 오늘의 이 순종과 섬김의 말씀은 없었을 텐데 예수님은 그러지 않으시고 먼저 본인이 제자들을 향해서 또 거기에 있는 가룟 유다까지 이렇게 발을 닦으신 것을 오늘 전도사님 말씀하셨는데 그런 섬김의 모습 또 그 십자가에 달려 죽기까지 하시는 그 순종의 모습 그리고 손수 원수까지 사랑하시는 그 모습을 보기에 정말 예수님이야말로 우리가 믿고 따라갈 예수님이란 것을 오늘 전도사님이 여러 번 강조하셨어요. 우리가 믿는 예수님 정말 오로지 예수님만 그렇게 할 수 있으셨기 때문에 우리는 그 예수님 믿고 따라가고 그 예수님 주신 힘으로 우리도 그렇게 하려고 노력하는 것 같아요. 여러분 우리가 살 때 우리 힘으로 안 되는 거 우리 힘으로 하지 말고요. 예수님이 주신 능력, 성령 하나님 주시는 능력으로 예수님 닮아가는 그리고 섬기고 또 힘들지만 그래도 하늘을 바라보고 또 원수를 사랑하는 저와 여러분이 되기를 간절히 바랍니다. 기도하겠습니다. 거룩하신 하나님, 우리를 위해 예수님을 보내주시고 그 예수님으로 말미암아 저희 죄를 속량하시고 저희에게 참 본을 보여주신 하나님께 감사와 존귀와 영광을 올려드립니다. 정말 우리가 살 때 정말 예수님의 섬김처럼 예수님의 사랑처럼 그리고 원수를 사랑하는 그 사랑으로 우리가 이 세상을 살 수 있도록 도와주시고 비록 우리는 힘이 없지만 그 예수님 믿고 예수님 주신 힘으로 살아갈 수 있게 도와주시옵소서. 다음 주 고난주일을 시작하는데 그 고난주일 준비하는 저희들로 삼아주시고 오늘 하루도 말씀 묵상하며 오로지 주께 영광 돌리는 우리 포틀랜드 영락교회 교우들이 될 수 있도록 주여 인도하여 주시옵소서. 감사하며 예수님 귀하신 이름으로 기도드립니다. 아멘. 여러분 금요예배 토요예배 뵙겠습니다. 안녕히 계세요.